Following the boycott of the African National Congress two-day National Consultative Conference proposal, the veterans and stalwarts announced that they were planning a consultative conference of their own for September. We ask what the plan is to save the ANC now. This is the Moneymakers. I'm Bruce Whitfield. I'm joined by a spokesperson for the ANC veterans, one of the stalwarts of the ANC, Murphy Morobe, to discuss everything from the outcome of the ANC policy conference, Mandela Day, transformation of the ANC, and of course the all-important, will it happen, the secret ballot, was the vote of no confidence in President Jacob Zuma. It's nice to have you here. I mean, quite a traumatic time that the ANC as an organisation is going through. Everybody I talk to in the organisation is feeling a sense of almost bereavement at the loss of the values, the loss of the organisation that many of you grew up in.
It isn't it like that. It's almost like a great member of the family, you know, is incapacitated, is dying, and we're all standing by feeling helpless as to what to do with it. And I think that the gross sense of aggrievement is very deep because, you know, the main issue for me has been the whole question of trust, especially when I look at my own development and growth under the progressive policies of the influences of the ANC, you know, and from when I was a student to when I went to prison in Robben Island, you know, being taught what the ANC stand for, being taught the values of the ANC, the principles, the politics, the issue of reliances, etc. And for me, it made a deep impression and it shaped who I was to become and who, in fact, I still want to continue to be. Now, in that context of the end of the UDF era, when the ANC came back into exile, from exile, there was a strong sense of trust because we could relate to what the representation of the ANC at the time was. And the people in the ANC, the people like Oliver Tambo, Walter Sisulu, Govan Mbeki, and those who came from exile, Chris Hani and them, they were men of honor and integrity. And in a way, we felt so comfortable in that, and someone, when one looks back, we could say, perhaps we took our eyes off the ball.
Completely.
And trusted too much, so that even when those who had the responsibility to look after our asset, the ANC, found themselves in a situation where they lapse into being gullible, they lapse into self-interest and so on, and eventually it got us to where we are.
Where is your watershed? I mean, is Polokwane your watershed? Did your watershed moment about your understanding of what the ANC is becoming, or has become, where did your understanding of there'd been this seismic shift in the organization that you grew up in to what it is today?
I think Polokwane was a watershed.
That was a watershed, but when did you realize that things had changed, that there'd been this shift? Because not everybody clicked at the time just how bad it was going to get.
I mean, personally, I think Polokwane took me by surprise, and more because at the time I was not at the conference myself because I was traveling, but where I was looking at the conference, it was the worst morning of my life, you know, and looking at how, I mean, I remember when we were activists and there were certain political parties we used to look at behaving in certain ways. To look at my organization, you know, degenerating into that kind of level was very traumatic for me. I recall saying to my partner then, who became is my wife now, that, you know, I can tell you what's happening here is going to repeat itself, because the way that transition, the ascendancy of the one to live out the other, it's not based on principle, it's based on all kinds of manner of things that are not related to what I would consider the best interests of the organization and the people.
And up until that point, I mean, the elder statespeople, the stalwarts of the ANC, were people taken seriously. People whose sacrifices had taken them out of society, in some cases for decades, either through exile or through going to prison, as you did in Robben Island, and so many other leaders of the ANC did, who went into exile. You grew up in that fabric, yet now you've been dismissed as non-entities. I mean, do you feel as if you're being treated like the dirt under somebody's shoe? It certainly looks like it from the outside.
It will come across that way, and in fact, perhaps it is intended to come across that way. But I think we are made of sterner stuff, you know, and it's really something that depicts the level of, you know, shallowness on those who would approach it that way, because it's based on protecting their interests right now, and at the same time throwing out, you know, what the traditions of the movement have been about all along.
But those interests are becoming increasingly transparent. We look at the enormous number of emails, this deluge of emails, the so-called Gupta emails, and the people who are being implicated in both the private sector, the public sector, and of course within the ANC itself. They're very clear maps of who is connected to whom, and it's really only a question of time as this picture becomes clearer and clearer that this can no longer sustain itself, and this patronage network that has been so dominant in South Africa for the last 5, 6, maybe even longer years has got to at some point implode.
It definitely is reaching that point now, and I think when the Constitutional Court made the ruling last year, and for us that was yet another line in the sand about where we stand and where we should stand. And at that point, in fact, many people in the ANC were sort of afraid to speak up, you know, and it is that moved us into action to say it cannot be that based on what the ANC traditionally and historically represented, you know, people should feel in their organization that they're not able to stand up for what is right, what is just, what is ethical. And to that extent, in fact, the support that when the initiative was made, that the veterans felt this was a cause worth taking up, was quite overwhelming.
And so this consultative conference that you've announced for September, what are you going to achieve? Not what you're hoping to achieve. What will it achieve?
Well, you know, I mean, the consultative conference, the idea is not an end in itself. It's just a mechanism that, based on the historical experience of the ANC, was a tool that was available to the organization to deal with the kinds of matters that it is faced with now. I mean, if the leadership was embracing of the idea, almost 8 months ago, 6 months ago when we raised it, I suspect that the developments could be very difficult, even though one would say it would be difficult to even factor in the impact of the emails that have come up now, because by then, you know, we knew that the issues about the Guptas were corruption and so on. But the extent and the nature has been put so much starkly on our table that it's just too traumatic for a lot of people.
But why does the ANC have an allergy to dealing with the problem? Because we've seen Bain, for example, suspend their country manager. We've seen Moses Khosana lose out on the job of chairman of Alexander Forbes. He says he's innocent of doing anything wrong and will clear his name, but he's lost the job at Alexander Forbes. Alexander Forbes said, we can't afford to have that smell in this room, thank you very much. We saw even Lynn Brown pushing back against the reappointment of Brian Molefe at Eskom. There are little pockets of enterprise which are pushing back and saying, you've not been found guilty of doing anything wrong, but there's a bad smell here, let's wait till the dust settles. The ANC is not doing that.
Well, we're still trying, at least I'm still trying to understand why it's not able to make those kinds of decisions. But at face value, it would seem to me that one of the issues that this situation raises is a whole question of accountability in the system, both in terms of the general electoral system and also the ANC's own constitution, in that where the structures have placed so much power into the hands of an individual, to such an extent that those who are within his immediate cohort of peership feel themselves incapable of engaging with the issues that arise that affect his complicity in some of these challenges. It's actually one of the problems.
And you look at the courage of Makosi Khoza, who stands up yesterday and says, now my daughter is getting death threats. I mean, this is, it doesn't get more vulgar than that. It's fine, you know, not fine at all. But if somebody is taking an active stance and they are threatened, it's a choice they make. But by sort of passing it down the line and beginning to threaten people's children, Makosi Khoza is standing up and saying, do what you like. I'm not going to die silent. she's a rare voice of courage within the current ANC, within the mainstream ANC. Is she alone, do you think?
I don't think she's alone. I mean, I think many people will look for a way of doing it because people love the ANC. There is something to be said for an organization that has over 100 years spoken for the most oppressed and downtrodden in the country, that after its 100th anniversary, it gets exposed as having been in the throes of a capture by nefarious characters who are only in it to get as much self-enrichment as possible. And what is worse is the fact that those who are aiding and abetting actually occupy some of the highest positions in government today. And that is what actually almost disables people about what to do. And therefore, the problem of accountability and how, in fact, it is structured for the organization to deal with this is a big issue. And hence what we're saying that look at Morogoro, look at Kabwe, look at how Oliver Tambo, Chris Hannes dealt with the issues. We are now at another inflection point. You know, that must be, something could be said for those. But because the people who are involved and the issues around which they are culpable are of such a nature and with proximity and access to power, it makes it very difficult for them, perhaps at the psychological level, to contend with the ultimate implication of what a conference like that would mean.
And it makes the secret ballot in August absolutely essential, does it not? Would you, I mean, do the stalwarts support the secret ballot, the call for the secret ballot?
It is a mechanism that's available to the extent that there is sense that...
Do you support it?
No, I support the secret ballot anytime, you know, and I don't see any reason why it should not be if
the president had the courage of his convictions that he had the full support of his party, he would let the chairman, the Speaker of Parliament, know that she should just go ahead with it. He's got full confidence in the support of his party. He doesn't have that confidence, hence there's this pushback against it.
Yeah, and I suppose, I mean, everyone is making their calculations as to which side the coin will fall. And therefore, those who feel that if you look at the secret ballot in Mohale City, there was an instance of a secret ballot that took place. So it's not even a strategic thing. I think it's a point of convenience, of what's convenient for whatever interest as to which stance to take on the tool of realizing a decision about whether, in fact,
would the president, if there was a secret ballot, would he survive it, in your opinion?
It's difficult to tell. I think Ben Turok made a very important point on this matter, based on the nature of the deployment process within the organization, that many people feel hamstrung by the fact that they owe so much, on the remuneration, and that comes through the process of being appointed by the party to be in parliament. So therefore, people's primary allegiance tend to be directed towards the party rather than towards the values and the ethos of what it means to be a member of parliament in terms of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa.
Murphy Morobe, I want to move on to the economy. Now, the state of the nation, the state of the economy. We come through the ANC policy conference. The centre seemed to have held at that policy conference. There was an extraordinary amount of pushback. There were some very heated arguments. Derek Hanekom tweeted a section where the debate around white monopoly capital was focused. The ANC is divided pretty much, it would seem, down the middle, certainly at the conference, on economic policy. But the centre held. Would you agree?
Well, to the extent one can find a point to put the line of drawing the centre, but there was clearly contestation of some of the key ideas there. Now, and I think that the important thing, even though we as veterans and stalwarts did not go, as that grouping, and some of the veterans were present and participated as part of branch members of the organization. So in a sense, I think that there's a flicker there that shows, hope, in that when the good forces actually come together and focus, they can be able to withstand the ground mainly on the pure force of argument and reason that lies behind their conception of what is in the interest of the people of this country. And when you follow some of the debates around white monopoly capital, you know, and clearly it was clear that those were distractions that were thrown into the equation, you know, to actually veer us away from focusing on the elephant in the room. And in this case, it's an elephant that is ridden, you know, by forces from India, you know, called the Guptas.
It's an Asian elephant. It's got small ears.
And an elephant nevertheless.
Yes, an elephant, and when the elephant gets, when the elephant storms about, it does a lot of damage. What is the economic state of our nation? I mean, you've got a deep background in economics. I mean, you were part of the Financial and Fiscal Commission. You understand this economy, you understand what works, you understand what doesn't. We know what's happening right now doesn't work, yet we keep doing more of the same in terms of trying to turn around this Titanic of an economy which has not only hit the iceberg but is taking on water. Look,
I think there is a significant overhang on the economy by the public sector, you know, and I mean, if one looks at the numbers that are starting to come up about the amounts of rands that have been stolen, that have been siphoned out of the economy from the dysfunctionality of many of the state-owned enterprises, who in fact are meant to be in the forefront of the implementation of the NDP. That to me tells me that the big overhang and drag on the economy is largely there. And saying that does not exonerate the private sector. No? But of course, private sector is driven by also vested interests, what is in the interest of the shareholders. People have been known to hold on to cash reserves, and they would argue that the political system is uncertain, and therefore people are not rushing to spend the money. So companies
could you blame them? Do you blame corporate South Africa for being reticent to invest its money when you see one-sided documents like the mining charter coming out and the rumours that the financial sector charter will be a cut and paste of the mining charter? Whether it is or not, we will see. But it's that level of uncertainty which says, why do you expect me to go and dig a hole in the ground with a 20-year view to take minerals out of the earth when I've got absolutely no certainty that I'll have any say over that hole in the ground 5 years from now?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't blame them on the one hand, and I think the Deputy President this morning, in addressing the Communist Party conference, he spoke in referring to the strategy and tactics of the ANC about the notion of unity and struggle, you know, and cooperation and contestation. It is an inherent contradiction that is there in the system, that those who we expect to lay out most of the money that is important to generate growth in the economy are precisely those who are being castigated as belonging to the other, at least in terms of the current debates that have actually ensued.
It's the white monopoly capital debate.
And then they get boxed into the corner, whereas on the one hand, you want to talk about cooperation. You know, we had the NEDLEC and all of those institutions that had been set up to find ways of managing those interfaces between them and us, you know. But in the context of the Gupta saga, all of that is now being poisoned, you know, courtesy of Bell Pottinger, you know, who actually playing to the strength and weaknesses in the system just threw a little bone.
But at the same time, none of these things are sustainable. So Bell Pottinger's strategy has fallen apart, massively exposed. They're in trouble in the UK with their own association that they belong to. They could face serious issues if they're found to be complicit in bribery issues in the, in terms of UK law. Bell Pottinger have got their work cut out for them. They've got their own problems now. And they've been exposed. The Gupta emails are exposing the Guptas. We have, on the positive side of this equation, a great example of what happens when the public sector and the private sector cooperate. And I know Telkom did cut thousands of jobs in its efficiency drive, But Telkom is a rare beast in that it pays a dividend to the state, which is that in the PIC, the state in the PIC is a 51% shareholder in Telkom. It controls Telkom, but the private sector involvement, Sipho Maseko and Jabu Mabuza, have done a great job of showing what is possible when an antiquated dinosaur of a state-owned entity allows private sector involvement on a highly transparent public basis.
You know, I think when one looks at the Telkom example, it shows what can be done, what can happen when we've got people who are seized with the essence of being South African in the context of a globalizing economy and being able to contest, you know, the space, not only with locals, but also with foreigners who are always standing at the door wanting to come in to eat our bacon. So you need to have senior leaders of these institutions who could stand up to the political vagaries that are always knocking on the door to look for extra money to do the kinds of things that they've been doing that have been found to be completely antithetical to the interests of the people. So people who can stand their own ground. And I think South Africa is replete with those individuals. But the problem is, at the top, the vested interest is such that it can't deal with those kinds of individuals. You know, it can open up for more of those kinds to come in because of the exposure that comes with it. And I think to the extent that Jabu and Sipho have done a fantastic job, and I think even with the other state-owned enterprises, there are South Africans there who can do the same thing.
Completely.
But it's just that with the deployment process that is driven from Luthuli House, which is dominated by elements who are connected to all of these interests, the poisoning of the system is just so deep, and it troubles me as to when and how we can get out of the trajectory.
And the trouble is, if anybody came forward to contest the leadership battle in December, to say, I want to be the next leader of the ANC, and I'm going to stamp out corruption, at that particular conference, they've got no chance because the vested interests are so strong that they've almost got to be seen to be allowing a little bit of continued nefarious activity while be seen to be cleaning up. It's a really difficult balance for anybody who's running for that leadership job to strike.
Absolutely. I mean, I listened to Deputy President Ramaphosa this morning, and he had a lot of gusto in his speech.
Finally.
You know, and he sounded like what we needed to hear from him to be able to make a case for himself as being better than what in fact is there. He still has to deal with the fact that he was in there when all of that happened. You know, as to when and how he's going to express his mea culpa, you know, we're waiting, because that will be an important moment for him to be able to show us that going to December, we have the prospect of a candidate that will be able to help the process of bringing.
Is there another candidate within the ANC who can do the job that is necessary to rescue not only the ANC, but also bring the country back from the brink? We're on the verge of junk, we're on the verge of another currency blowout, we're on the verge of as a result of that, inflation, currency depreciation, inflation, worsening of living standards in South Africa, increase of unemployment beyond the 27.3% where it sits at the moment. Is there another candidate?
Well, there has to be other candidates.
No, but is there, to your mind,
well, to my mind,
who should be putting their flag in the ground and saying, I'm not connected to these guys, I'm not connected to anybody, I am the Macron. Macron came from nowhere and is breathing fresh air into France. Do we need our Macron moment?
No, I mean, even as I love them all as individuals, I think, to my mind, I think there needs to be the process still has to throw up a little bit more. Yeah. But given the way things are likely to go, you know, is really going to end up being, so far, the contestation between Ramaphosa and Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. And that's why I'm saying that between now and then, you know, we need to hear more of the kind of messaging that came out of Cyril's speech this morning. Is that the sort of messaging that's going to win him the presidency of the ANC? Is that not going to be counterintuitive within the ANC of the vested interest, the ANC that could hold the balance of power at the conference? Well, my view is that right now the balance of power is increasingly being held by those people who are going to wake up and vote in 2019. And I think that all of them are trying to keep an ear out for what it is saying. Right now, you know, where I am, it just tells me that unless the messaging that comes from any of these candidates is one that can begin to show people how the ANC is going to get out of this. We've put a proposition to have a consultative conference. It would have allowed for that kind of introspection in a way that will involve people understanding that we are going through this process. It can't be done behind corners because, you know, the ANC came into power on the public ticket. It calls itself...
How frightened are you of 2019? As things stand at the moment, as you look ahead to 2019, how frightened are you that the movement that you've supported all of your life, that you've grown up in, that you've gone to prison for, that you've suffered for, that you've sacrificed for, is going to be out of power by 2019?
I'm frightened for the ANC, and I think that they've got to get the bit between the teeth and actually face up to its own failings without fear, and to trust the people, to trust the process, and actually bring themselves out there. You know, for me by now, I would not just say a facetious, "I'm sorry, we are sorry." It needs to, when you say sorry to people, it needs to be felt. It must come across as genuine. It must really show people that you've really dug deep into what you have done to cause a situation that this country, that they dreamed about for so long as a democracy, you're about to sell it, you know, to the highest bidder in the market.
Murphy Morobe, thank you very much indeed. Spokesperson for the ANC veterans and the stalwarts, Murphy Morobe, very generous with his time, and I thank him very much for that. There will be more discussions on ANC policy issues as we head toward that elective conference in December. And of course, the big fights that are going to happen between now and then are going to cause an extraordinary amount of noise, huge number of ructions, and are going to make you lose sleep at night. You need to get used to that idea, but also have faith that common sense does prevail eventually. Hopefully, eventually is December this year and not 2 years from now. Until next time, good night.